So thanks, Carolyn. It's interesting listening to Michelle. I'm also a dad of 3 kids, and I can empathise with some mornings getting in the car and actually feeling like I've done a day's work before I actually get in the car to go to a day's work. So I can absolutely empathise where you're coming from. It felt a little bit like, and I'm not sure if I should say this, how politically correct it is, it felt a little bit like Alcoholics Anonymous this morning when you kicked us off. I'm here I am. It's so many months since my last drink. But I was actually saying to Tanya, I thought it was a great way of kicking it off. And when we think about engagement and innovation, we do very much talk about the individual. So I'd absolutely agree with your point. We are a big multinational. We employ 90,000 people around the world, but the principles we adapt can be applied in any setting, whether you're a big company, a small company, a local company, multinational, whether you're a private sector company or public sector, whether you're an SME, whether you're a self-owner. It applies, the key principles apply in any situation. I think that's a key theme that we're trying to get across today. But if I do the Alcoholics Anonymous, I'm not as exciting a background as Carolyn. I certainly don't have the background and the business acumen as someone like Tanya. My own history is I'm born and bred in Dublin, but it was great to come up to Belfast because I have family up here. I've had an uncle who worked in the fire brigade in Belfast for 41 years, he told me last night. And he married my mum's sister from the south, and she moved up here for love. And they had 2 kids. And what's really good when you talk about the economy and what's happening in the north, my cousins were there last night, and one of them is actually moving back from Australia, having lived there for the last 20 years, and she's moved back to her partner with a view to living and raising a family here in the north. So it was really nice, actually a great opportunity to come up and meet them. It's really nice for me. I'm the youngest of 4 boys as well, so some of the mental scars are still there from that. But that's also been great because in terms of coaching and listening to Stephen talking about coaching from a rugby perspective, I have 3 older brothers who've coached me, and they work in the public sector, and 2 of them actually run their own business. So it's quite a diverse background. And my own work background is I actually started with IBEC. So IBEC is the Irish Business Employers Confederation. Would be similar in some ways to the CBI here and the CBI in the UK, but also has a consultancy arm. And that's where I started my working life as a graduate, as a slightly fresher face and probably a little bit more hair as a graduate about 20 years ago. And that job involved working with companies to help them think about their, at that time, probably their industrial relations strategy, because that was the terminology for those of us who are HR folks in the room. That's probably the terminology we used. And as the son of someone who actually, my dad was actually a shop steward in the BNI, British and Irish sales line, it was quite interesting to go in and actually represent employers negotiating with trade unions. So to this day, he's never let me forget how I betrayed my roots. I moved from there, spent about 7 years with IBEC, very much working with manufacturing companies, and again, all shapes and sizes and right around the country. And I do remember driving back a couple of nights from places like Cavan and Donegal, nearly falling asleep at the wheel. So again, mental health and well-being are themes that I've learned to adopt for myself. But after IBEC, I moved to financial services. Dare to say that at this stage with the economic crisis, because it usually gets a chorus of boos. But I actually got out in 2005, and I was lucky in that I could see, to be clear, I couldn't see what was coming, because unfortunately I took my shares with me. I still have them, and they're worth nothing. But I could kind of see what was happening in terms of cost cutting, and what was starting to creep into financial services was a very heavy emphasis on cost. Every business needs to keep an eye on cost, but it was starting to get imbalanced. And for me personally, in terms of my passion, that just didn't necessarily fit with the passion I had and the original idea I'd gone into HR. And the reason I got a passion was around developing people and thinking how people get their most out of work and also give their best back in. And that started to clash a little bit with me. So I was fortunate enough that Microsoft, got a phone call from Microsoft, heard the name, Bill Gates was still in charge at that stage, decision made. But the confession I'll make is I'm a technophobe. So unlike most people who work at Microsoft, technology is not necessarily my strength. I've learned to appreciate it, and I have to say I've learned to really see the power of it. And in terms of where our societies are at the moment, and particularly the crisis we have, it is a key enabler for everybody. And you'll see a little bit about how Microsoft thinks about that. So that's my Alcoholics Anonymous pitch. Okay, happy to take any questions on that at the end. So what we want to talk about is engage to innovate, and how we think about that in Microsoft Ireland. And one of the reasons we were asked, I think, from Tanya to talk to you today was we've been lucky enough in the last 3 years to win the best company to work in Ireland. Which is a great award. It's one way, but only one way, that we measure our employee engagement strategy, and it's also an external measure. So there's some external accreditation which fits with some internal measures, but to be clear, it's not the be-all and end-all. It's just one measure that we use. But I think that was part of the reason to ask us to come along today. And the reason I mentioned that to you, it's important because we have only been number one for the last 3 years. It's not like we've been number one forever. And as I say, it's not the be all and end all. But in terms of employee engagement, this process that we've used to go through best companies has actually been a really good learning process for us. Because if you're not familiar with what they do, the way they actually judge the competition is it's done 2/3 on an internal employee survey. So it's basically what our people say about their working experience. And then secondly, the other third is actually a written submission that a panel of judges actually looks at and evaluates in terms of best practices. What's very interesting is Microsoft first entered it before my time back in 2003 and won it in the first year. And then slipped to top 10 in the next 2 years. And just before I joined, a decision was actually made to actually withdraw from the competition. And you might say, okay, big deal, what's the big deal? But what was really interesting from an employee engagement perspective is we had the following responses from our employees. First of all, hang on, were we not in it this year? I thought we were in this thing. We won it a few years ago. We've been top 10. What happened? Why weren't we asked whether or not we should be in this competition? Did they not actually think they should talk to us about this? And have we actually given up? So we won number one 3 years ago. We've been top 10 for the last few years. What's happened? Is it just all about being number one? And the lesson we learned was that's pretty fundamentally bad employee engagement. We didn't listen, we didn't inform, we didn't consult, we didn't take on board the views. When we'd actually taken the trouble and asked their own people to take the trouble in the last 3 years to actually fill in a survey, get feedback from it and work on it, and then suddenly the door comes down and we don't participate. So very important learning from us. The second reason this is important is I'll show you a little bit about the footprint of Microsoft in Ireland, but it coincided with us actually standing back and actually realizing when we came together as a Microsoft family and as one Microsoft, the impact we could have for our customers, for the community you work in, and also for our people was actually exponential compared to if we operated in the individual business units we have here in Ireland. So there was a kind of a nice match of a mistake and a bad judgment. I have to say it wasn't me. But it also coincided with a more strategic thinking and a more strategic direction for Microsoft in Ireland. And I'll share a little bit of that with you. So what I want to talk about is 3 things. And coming from Dublin, saying 3 is actually pretty good. So I'm talking about 3 things, not 3 as in something that comes out of the ground. Because we do find it hard, as you know, we do find it hard to pronounce our THs down south. So it's 3 things I'm going to talk to you about. So the first one is, let's baseline when we talk about employee engagement. What are we actually talking about? And I sat in the BT session that Fiona and Stephen ran. And someone behind me, somewhere in this row, probably someone here, said, it's actually quite a difficult term. It's about hearts and minds. And when you actually think about it, we actually probably bandy this term around a lot. I think we're guilty as HR people to try out terms and it's the latest funky thing. What does it actually mean and what does innovation mean? Secondly, why are they important? I think that's a really important question now when companies are under a lot of pressure and the people who work in our companies are under a lot of pressure outside of work. So why would you bother doing this now? Would you not be better just battening down the hatches, focusing on cost and productivity and getting through the storm and coming out the other side? And then particularly for us, going back to where I started, is what are the key principles we apply, but also what are the learnings we have? Because we do not have every answer and we don't know everything and we certainly haven't got it 100% right. We do some good things, but one of the attractions for me to come up here today was actually to learn from others as well. And the BT session, I have a couple of notes to catch up on with those guys and I intend to sit in one of the sessions this afternoon. So I wouldn't by any stretch of the imagination say this is perfect, and I think the learnings along the way are probably the most important piece that I'll go through with you. Okay? So, first of all, a little bit of context, and if, like me, you've attended a few of these seminars, you've probably sat through 5 decks or 5 slides where someone explains all about their company. So I'm not going to give you the usual pitch on that, but I want to cover 2 very simple things. One, this is Microsoft's mission. So to enable people and businesses around the world reach their full potential. And if you think about employee engagement, that's a dream from a HR director's point of view, because it basically gives you a great hook to say to people, when you come in here, when you work hard, when you give it sweat and tears, this is actually the impact you're having. You're helping children in terms of their education, you're helping businesses grow, you're helping SMEs develop their business and be the backbone of the economy. That's what you do in your job. Okay, so you may write code or you may do performance reviews or training development programs, but actually this is what you're doing. And it's a great hook for us to connect our people back to it. And again, I'll touch on this later on. So that's one important thing to think about. First of all, what's the mission of your organization? Have you got one? And how do people connect to it? The second piece is Microsoft in Ireland. So we were actually set up in Dublin 25 years ago. And we were actually set up as a manufacturing plant. So some people in the audience may not remember this, but there used to be things called floppy disks that you stuck in a computer. We manufactured those. So it was actually a factory with production operatives, all the things you'd expect in an industrial situation. But over the last sorry, let's just flick down one. Over the last few years, we've developed to actually 4 key parts of our business here in Dublin. So we have an operations centre, which is basically the EMEA hub for Microsoft. We serve 109 countries, and we process about 16 billion in revenue through that EMEA hub. We have a sales business in Dublin, and 11 years ago we opened our Belfast office, which is just over near the Titanic Quarter. There's about 20, 25 people there who do a great job for us. One of them actually learned this morning used to work for business in the community, which I didn't know, which is great to hear. We have a development centre where we develop and localise product. So it's core product development on things like Windows, Office, Xbox, but also we localise primarily for the EMEA market. So for example, if you use Office, it's available in over 100 countries, everything from Basque to Gaelic to French, Spanish, etc., etc. And what we've added in the last few years, which is strategically very important for us, is over on the left-hand side is a data centre. So if you've heard about the concept of cloud computing and cloud services, yeah, this is where those services are hosted. So if I take a stand back and I say to you in 2005 a decision was made, not a good example of employee engagement, at the same time we started to recognise this footprint we have in Ireland is very unique, because basically what we've got is people developing the product, getting it out the door to customers, and obviously important enough getting paid for it, then people selling the product, and finally us hosting the services. So we've got the full value chain here in Ireland, and it's the only place outside of our headquarters that you have that full end-to-end value chain. So as this picture started to develop and come together, the conversation around the time I joined, not led by me to be clear, but I was lucky enough to join at this time, was with this unique footprint, how do we think about employee engagement? How do we think about really thinking about this differently and thinking about this as one Microsoft, not the traditional Microsoft way, which would be 4 distinct businesses? And how do we think about that in terms of innovation? And when you pull that together, that's a really, really powerful opportunity for us. So again, I think it's just important to give you that context because it has influenced the approach we've taken. And I think when you think about your business, particularly people who maybe work in public sector or large private sector companies, do you think about the breadth of operation you have, or do you tend to think in your own distinct world, which certainly in multinationals tends to be the case? So just that context for you. So let me try and define employee engagement. And it's hard, and someone said to me recently, if you actually look it up, there's something like 50 plus definitions, and if you look it up on Wikipedia or whatever it is, there's probably 50 plus definitions. I'm a pretty simple guy, and I try and think about it in 3 ways. First of all, how do people think about their job? So the famous story about John F. Kennedy when he went into the NASA station and he found the guy sweeping the floor. You've heard this one? He asked the guy, what are you doing? Expecting to hear when I'm sweeping the floor. No, I'm actually putting a man on the moon. So how do people think about their job? And for us, how do people think about their job, which is helping others realise their full potential? And that's quite a different spin on your job than I was sweeping the floor. The second thing is, how do people feel? So do they align to that mission? Do they align to the picture of what you're trying to do as a company? And I explained to myself where I started to see a bit of a disconnect between my values and my passion in terms of where a particular company I work for, which is a very good company and still is a very good company, but what I wanted to do and give back in terms of that company. So how does that align up with your own values? And the third bit then is act. So think, feel, and act. What do you do day to day? Is it about, I think you used the phrase, Michelle, is it about just punching in and checking out? Is it about doing the job? Or is it actually, hang on, I've got an opportunity to play a bigger role, I can make a bigger impact. How does that frame my mind in terms of how I go about my job? But it is a very difficult concept, and I thought the easiest way to actually do it was maybe to show you, first of all, what it isn't. Because it's probably an easier way of getting across the message, okay? So that's what it isn't. And lettuce is the second thing of probably what it is. And this is just a personal story, again, in the interest of personalising what we're talking about today. Very small example. It might sound a bit corny, but genuinely, when I was thinking about how to get this across, it came back to me. So again, probably about 20 years ago, I was young, single in my 20s, living with a very similar-minded individual. And this phrase of, going out is or staying in is the new going out, that certainly wasn't the way we lived our lives, because we probably spent most of our time living outside the apartment we lived in at the time. But for some reason, and I can't remember why, but for some reason I decided to invite my parents around for lunch, which was, God knows what I was thinking about at 22, 23 years of age. Got up on the Sunday morning, had been out the night before, and said, right, they'd like a salad, I'll get a salad. Discovered there was no lettuce in the house. And this is a really basic example. But I went down to the local convenience store, and they actually made sandwiches. It was a Spar, or Eurospar, and they made sandwiches on a Saturday. Didn't do it on a Sunday. Asked the lady behind the counter, would you have a head of lettuce? No. Haven't got any head of lettuce or sold out. I said, oh God. I said, listen, I'm coming in here a little bit, got my parents coming around, what am I going to do? have you anything you can do for me? She said, hang on a second, we may have some left over from yesterday. So I had this picture of some mouldy, slightly out-of-date lettuce appearing. But to be fair to her, she went down to the back of the shop, disappeared for about literally 5 minutes. I was actually getting worried for her in terms of where she'd gone. But she actually came back with a box with the lettuce they'd used for the sandwiches the day before. Now, you might be saying, what's that got to do with employee engagement? Very simple thing to do for her on a Sunday morning was 3 or 4 customers in the shop. Sorry, we don't have any lettuce left, sorry. Can't do anything about it. She said, what's my job here? Look after the customer. I'll go the extra yard, I'll go back, I'll root around in the fridge, God knows what else was down there, and I'll bring back, and that guy looks after her. And I have to say, it's a really, really small example. But honestly, when I was thinking about employee engagement and trying to make it simple and personalise it, this example came back to me. The other example, from a work perspective, was when I worked with IBEC, as I say, I was mainly working with manufacturing companies. And one particular company I worked with have, I think it's now either 11 or 13 manufacturing sites around Ireland. I think it was about 8 or 9 at the time. But the country manager, the guy who ran the Irish operation, I remember talking about this because they had a lot of trade union difficulties and it was a lot of questions. It seemed very reactive in terms of how they worked with the unions. It was very much them and us. It was quite old-fashioned, and we were starting to talk about how do we shift the game. And employee engagement was starting to come on the table in terms of a new way of thinking about how you really get people bought in and ultimately help the performance of the business, but also help people in terms of their own performance potential. And it was interesting having the conversation because I worked with the HR manager for the company at the time. And when we thought about getting it across to the country manager, it actually clicked on him very easily because we did the usual theory and we put up all the nice slides and so on. It was great. But he actually said to me, I think I know what you're talking about, because when I go into the factory, the first thing he did was he actually used to walk around the factory floor. So he wouldn't meet with the management team. He'd go in through reception and just do a tour of the factory floor. And it wasn't a presidential tour. It was, okay, so how are you getting on in your job? This machinery, how would you lay it out? From a health and safety perspective, how are we doing in health and safety? Can we improve health and safety? Productivity-wise, if we looked at this, what would we do? And he said he could have left without meeting the management team at the factory at that stage, because he knew from the answers he was getting whether or not productivity, costs, absenteeism were going to be good or not. He didn't need to see the data. He simply needed to have a conversation, get the look and feel, and to him, that was employee engagement. So again, hopefully that helps ground a little bit what this mysterious term needs for it. And again, happy in the Q&A, maybe there's better examples or better things out there. So innovation. We think about innovation in 2 ways. We think about it firstly, obviously in terms of the products and services we provide, but also in terms of the workplace we have. So personally, I think about our innovation story in 3 ways. Firstly, I think about innovation. So let's call that new innovation. And that's the Xbox Connect, which is our gaming policy, our gaming product, which would be the competitor with the Nintendo Wii and Sony PlayStation. That product is actually the fastest selling consumer product of all time. So it's actually faster than the iPhone and the iPad. That's new innovation. The second way we think about it is reinvention. So I had to turn my phone off, but I would show you my Windows Phone, which BlackBerry is a very good product, doesn't have some of the BlackBerry issues. And I would honestly say versus the iPhone, it's probably more designed for people who are using a phone for both work and personal life. iPhone's a great product. Work and personal life, I think we have a better offering, to be honest with you. But we had to go back and look and completely reinvent our phone, because the phone we had, to be honest, probably wasn't as good as it could be. There's probably a more direct way of saying it, but you get the message. And the third way is then, how do we think about reinvention? And again, if you think about, if you're looking at our industry and where business is going, one of the hot topics at the moment is cloud services, where basically, if you think about your IT infrastructure, whether you're a small company or a big company, you have an IT infrastructure. You have servers, you have IT professionals looking after all that. This move to the cloud services basically means someone else can look after that for you, either in your own company or in their own data center. And the product we've launched about 6 months ago is Office 365, which is the latest invention of Office, the Office product you'll all be familiar with, but actually now hosted in the cloud. And what that means in simple terms is if you're an SME that Michelle referred to, you don't have IT infrastructure costs anymore. We, along with plenty of other good providers, can do that for you, and this is the type of product you're seeing. So when we think about innovation, I think, and I certainly say personally, I probably years ago thought about innovation has to be the new, big, funky, sparky thing. It can actually be just reinventing something that's there, or it can be doing a better way of doing something you're already doing. And when we bring it back to our employee engagement strategy, what we're saying to our people is, listen, yes, come up with something new, come up with an Xbox or Connect, but also think about how can you do things differently or better. And sometimes that doesn't have to be new. It's an evolution. It doesn't have to be a revolution, or it doesn't have to be a completely new innovation. So I just wanted to ground the terms we're using because sometimes they can get bandied around and sometimes they can be quite confusing. So that's the first part of three. The second part is why are they important and why are they important now? And I think from talking to people, and I was saying to a few people, I make a point of trying to go to something like this once a quarter to stimulate my own thinking, because I think just personally I need that, otherwise I can get stuck in a rut. And when you talk to people at the moment, there is a lot of conversation about why would you bother engaging with your people now? Why would you continue to invest, like BT showed us, in training and development? Because costs are under pressure internally, and in terms of the cost offerings you make to your customers, productivity is under pressure, and then the competition is getting tougher, not just in Europe, but we've got competition from all around the world. But effectively, there's three things we try and think about. First of all, change. And if I take it into the employee engagement space, what we've noticed in the last years is a huge blurring between people's personal life and their work life. Effectively, 9 to 5 is finished for all intents and purposes. It is around helping people marry very busy lives outside of work with very busy working lives, and how do they most effectively do that? And secondly, what we're noticing is how people communicate in work is changing enormously. So the generation behind us, or certainly behind me, for them, email is probably snail mail now. So when we talked about, certainly for my generation, it was, faxes were great. Haven't seen a fax machine in years. Then it became email. The guys behind us, it's all about social media. It's about Facebook, it's around blogs, it's around podcasts. It's not about mail anymore. And that has implications for how we engage with our people. The second piece is around competition. And believe it or not, we have an incredibly competitive talent market for the people we want to recruit and keep. Unemployment in the South is actually 14%. And it's interesting, again, Tanya referred to the skills deficit. There is most definitely still a skills deficit in the South as well. We see it a little bit in the North. We're lucky enough in that we're probably a smaller operation, so it doesn't cause us as many challenges. But again, it is a very competitive space because you have a lot of good companies, North and South, who are trying to recruit a lot of the same type of people, and certainly for leadership and management positions are looking at some solid generic skills. What's also hard for us is some of our businesses are very niche businesses. So our global supply chain is run from Dublin. The data centre I showed you is run in Dublin. The type of sales skills we look for can be highly technical in some cases. So very often we're actually fishing for people who are outside of the island. And again, that can be very tough for us. So we really do need to continue focusing on engagement, because if we don't, we won't hire the best people and we won't be able to keep and retain the best people. And then the third thing is the challenging times we're in. And I think there's probably two schools of thoughts with companies, which is one, let's get through this, let's batten down the hatches and everything will be okay when we come out. Or okay, we've got to make some tough decisions, and we've had to do that in the last few years as well. How do we actually engage our people in those tough decisions? And my very strong belief is when you do it the second way, when you involve people, consult and inform them, you will get the bang for buck. Because if you just take the foot off the pedal now on employee engagement, when things come around, and they will come around, it's just a question of when, if you haven't engaged your people in the right way, they'll know it and they'll be the first to go. So there's very fundamental business arguments in terms of your talent, but also your business agenda, in my view, and certainly our philosophy on it has been, in fact, in some ways, put the foot down on employee engagement and maybe focus on it even more in the last few years. The other reason I say that is we are seeing people very challenged outside of work. So we're lucky enough, we have 1,100 people in Ireland, North and South. We're more or less the same numbers we were 5 years ago. We have had some redundancies, unfortunately, but we've also had some investments. But even where people have been in a pretty good job and have been lucky, we're a pretty good employer, there are challenges they're facing outside of work, maybe in their own family or with relatives and friends who are suffering badly at the moment. And the question we have is, when they come into work, how are we supporting with that? Because you can't ignore what's going on outside of work. And if you're really going to get the most from your people, you need to support them in terms of outside work and inside work. So I would say to you it's a very strong argument. The other thing I would say to you is there is an opportunity here, because from a competitive position, not everybody's thinking about this the same way. So being very much the way our CEO would think about it, this actually presents an opportunity for us to actually maybe even get more of the great talent that's out there and ideally retain as many of our people as we can. So that's the second of three. Why do I think you need to keep focused on employee engagement innovation? So that's a little bit of context. I want to share with you, again, happens to be three principles that guide how we think about employee engagement. The first one is around trust. And trust for us is where people are given a direction, they're given a focus in terms of their role, but then you get out of the way and you let them do it. And once they're consistent with our organizational values, How they do that job, where they do it, when they do it, that's up to them. And I think what's really interesting is the reflection we've had over the last few years is you need to give people that trust. You shouldn't ask them to, they shouldn't have to be earning that trust, it should be given to them. So from day one, you come in, you're pretty clear in terms of your role, clear in terms of where it connects to the wider area. How you go and do it is now up to you. And we put a lot of focus in the last years in terms of our technology, and we're lucky because we're a technology company, but there is good, relatively cheap technology out there that can help you with this. Our technology, our managers, and our leaders and how they think about managing their people, and also our physical working environment, so that people can have the flexibility to come to work when they need, to work from home when they need, if they need to collect their kids at lunchtime, to go and collect their kids at lunchtime, if they're passionate about training rugby kids, that they can get out early in the evening, or if they've been out late the night before or worked late the night before, they can come in late. But it's actually much more than flexibility. It's actually a new way of working. Because what we're really saying to our people is, you don't need to be in the office all the time. How and when you communicate and work with your colleagues can happen from anywhere and in any shape or form you want. And what's really interesting is, one of the concerns we had is that we'd lose that sense of team, that people would actually stay outside the office and we'd lose it. What you actually find is people still want to come into the office. I think it was Tanya said, you found you couldn't work on your own, or was that your phrase? Our people want to still come into the office. They still want to come in and meet their colleagues. So you can still keep that same sense of team and camaraderie. But what you've got to trust them with is, you measure them with their outputs. So here's what I expect from you, here's what success looks like, let's agree that, off you go and do it, and we've regular check-ins, performance reviews. But I don't care within our line or core values how you got there, all I'm going to measure is the end result. So that's a really, really important thing, and I think the crucial point is that people are given that trust from day one, that they don't have to earn it. The second bit is about impact. So when we hire people, one of the questions we'll ask, and I won't give you all the questions in case you're ever interviewed by us, but one of the questions we ask is, how are you thinking about the impact you're going to have beyond your job with our community, with our customers, and internally within the company? And what we're really testing with someone is, again, what's their frame of reference? We've got a mission statement. What's your part going to be in that mission statement? And we won't hire someone unless they really want to go and make a difference. Once we're clear on that and they come in, there's lots of opportunity to make a difference. And we have an environment where people are actually encouraged to go out beyond the day job and think about where they're going to make that difference. So for example, in our development centre, we actually have a grassroots group called the Garage, or if you're an American, the Garage. And what these guys actually do is they get together every Tuesday evening and they pick a technical issue and they'll actually work on it. So some of the, I can't take out my Windows Phone in case it interferes with this, some of the applications on Windows Phone, those guys have just developed because they've seen a niche and they want to go and develop it, and they've got a passion for it, and they want to give something back to our customers. We run a thing called an annual Think Week, where we actually ask employees to submit papers, literally written papers, on a key business challenge or a key opportunity they see for us. And we encourage them to do that. And that's rated by our senior leadership team. They get feedback and recognition. And one of the initiatives that came out of that is we provide free software to non-profit organizations. One of our groups actually recognized that the way that our SharePoint or our website was set up for those people to understand what was available and how we'd use it was extremely poor. It was not a good customer experience. And they had a passion around giving back to the community. They went and completely redesigned the website on their own bat. And the feedback has been phenomenal because they completely simplified what technology means for those groups and how they can use that technology. So again, an opportunity they come up with, trying to make a difference above and beyond their own role. And the third bit then is around personal development. So have you got the trust? Can you make an impact? Okay, if you're going to do that, we obviously need to make sure we invest in your personal development. And again, it was interesting looking at the BT presentation. This is something obviously BT are continuing to invest in as well. We think about personal development, a principle is 70-20-10. And 70-20-10 is 70% of your development, and the most effective development is actually active learning. So either on your own job or with something above and beyond your job, but when you're actually actively doing something, not theory. But to support that, we'll do two things for you. One, 20% of your development plan should be around coaching and mentoring from others. So we have formal people who are trained to be coaches and mentors in the organization, and they actually make themselves available to employees, and that works both ways. And it's interesting, when you talk to our mentors, they will tell you they get as much from the relationship as the mentee, because they're learning all the time as well. And then the 10% is your classical training and development program. So what's the formal classroom training or event you're going to attend? What we deliberately do is, on the 70%, we encourage people to take something beyond their own job. So again, that situation I described where we had 4 businesses in Ireland and we started to think about one Microsoft in Ireland, how would we impact? We have a number of business groups that sit across the 4 businesses that I showed you. And they're for key business focus areas. So things like environmental sustainability, community affairs, diversity and inclusion, how we work with the academic community and help the education system. And we have people from every part of our business working together who normally wouldn't work together. So developers working with salespeople, working with project managers and operations, working with, God forbid, HR people to actually look at some of these common challenges. What's fantastic is the development people get from that is broadening their minds and completely changing their perspective in terms of some of these challenges, which can spark incredible innovation, not just on that business group, but actually when they go back to their day job. It really helps how they think innovatively about their own role. So that's a really, really core one. The sweet spot that we've found probably over the last year, 18 months, is when you combine these 3. So when you give someone to focus on their personal development, think about, when I'm working on that, what's the impact I can have, and then give them the autonomy and trust to deliver on it. And 2 or 3 interesting examples would be, for example, our graduate program. So we just launched a new graduate program this year, and our graduates will actually adopt a non-profit organization and work with them to develop their technology strategy. So they're getting developed in terms of, how would I think about technology strategy if I ran that organization? I'm a developer, I normally wouldn't be involved in this at all. I just write code, it stretches my thinking. And if I'm a non-developer, how do I actually think about, how do these guys use technology? What are they doing with it? But they're also giving something back because it's free to the non-profit. The second example would be our managers' coaching skills. So a year ago, we launched an initiative with a company called Job Care in Dublin, who work with ex-prison offenders. And we get our managers to develop their coaching skills by actually coaching the ex-prison offenders and coaching the people who work with the ex-prison offenders. So again, win-win in terms of those people getting developed and obviously giving something back. So you can see the connection in terms of personal development goes back to impact, and people given the trust to go and spend time in that, recognizing that they've obviously got a job to do as well. So they're the principles that we've lived by over the last few years. And what I want to do is then just share with you the learnings along the way. So as I say, this journey started probably, I joined Christmas '05, so probably around summer '06. And it has not been perfect by any stretch of the imagination, and certainly there's a lot we've learned. And I think the learnings are probably the most important bit in terms of what we've gradually realized over the last few years, and we'll continue to learn as we go. But the first one is around leadership and management. And leadership, in our view, can come from any level. So giving the example of people taking ownership of projects, like how we communicate our offerings to the non-profit sector in a very different way. So that leadership can come from anywhere. The expectation of our managers is that they focus, first of all, to give people a clear focus. So what is your job about? What's the impact you want to have, and what are you going to do? That secondly, they treat everyone like an individual. So it's interesting, Karen, when you kicked off talking about your own individual experience. In my first managerial role, the advice I was given was, just treat people the way you expect to be treated yourself, Joe. And I have to say, I fundamentally disagree with that. And at the time, I probably agreed with it. I fundamentally disagree with it, because what works for me will not work for you, will not work for you. We're different. I feel a bit like that sketch in The Life of Brian. We're all individuals. And there's someone up the back going to say we're not. But seriously, you have to get to know what makes some people tick, T-I-C-K, and what will not make them tick. And if you don't do that, you're actually not going to get the most from people, and they're ultimately not going to give the most back and develop the way they can. So it's really core for our managers that they set the focus, but they also understand the individual and then provide the right coaching and support to that individual. What we've done in the last couple of years to make sure we get this right is we actually will not allow someone move to a people manager position in our organization unless they've gone through a specific assessment center. So they'll do an interview, but they'll also specifically go through an assessment center. And prior to them going on that, they will go on programs to explore what management is about, to see, is it right for them? Because for some people, it's not right. And that doesn't mean you can't have a career. You don't have to move into the managerial chain to have a career. So the first thing is to test for you what's right for you. Does it fit with your values and your passion? If it is, then we'd really rigorously assess you, because the most important cog in the machine is actually going to be around the manager and the employee's experience. So that's one example first. The second one is about influence. So if you want people to really engage, to really buy in, to have their hearts and minds, soul in the company, you need to give them influence. And if again, go back to those examples of the cross-business focus groups that we have, we give them autonomy and budget to make decisions. So we have a group that work on our green agenda. We happen in Dublin to have 2 buildings which are about a mile apart, and they they actually put in an electric car to help people get from A to B, which has been more efficient and gives something back to the environment. It's just one example, plenty of other examples on it. But you've got to give people that influence if they're going to want to make an impact. The third one is around communications, and this looks like a weird maths formula. I was never very good at maths in school, I have to say. What I'm trying to get across is you need to think about your communications in a 360 way. And the way we've thought about it is, it's just about very basic things. Inform, consult, listen, and crucially respond. But do that in lots of different ways. Use technology, use podcasts, use live meetings, use videos, bring people together face to face, use email. It still is relevant in some cases. But you've got to do that, because if you don't do it in a business like ours, we've actually tested this. When we say something once, it takes 10 times for people to really get the message. So it's really, really critical that we continue to focus on how we communicate with our people and how we continue to do it on a regular basis. So very quickly go through the others, because I'm getting the same evil glare that Michelle was getting. So 3 things. In challenging times, the bar goes higher. So we found we've had some difficult decisions to make in the last years. We had to make about 60 people redundant 2 to 3 years ago, which was a very difficult process. And in some parts of our business, was the first time there being redundancies. But again, the philosophy we took was, let's bring people into that decision, let's communicate it early, let's get them involved, let's get them testing the decision making and the business rationale, and then let's communicate in a very open way as we go along this process. So we happen to be non-union, but we actually did create it and consulted a forum and employees through that process, and we made sure all of the information was shared, which sounds very basic, but believe it or not, the people's response was incredibly positive. So we had people who didn't want to leave, but genuinely the feedback at the end was, listen, tough decision, personally would like to say, but I honestly believe you treated me as well as you could. And that's a real litmus test of any company when we're making those tough decisions. And I do believe in terms of our ability to attract and retain people, that was a litmus test that we passed and is really, really crucial and will help us to continue to attract and keep great people. The second bit is, or the next bit is to help people feel part of something bigger. So I explained how we have 4 businesses in Ireland. The impact we can have when we come together is phenomenal. So the impact we have for our customers is actually very different when we don't just put our salespeople out to customers. So this is going to be quite a scary thought, but I actually go and meet customers. And I meet them as a HR colleague, not to sell to them. I have no bonus on this. It doesn't do anything for me. But I honestly believe that I can have a different type of conversation than the salesperson going out and talking to the business decision maker. Because I can help a HR person think about how they use their technology. And in most cases, they've already got it. Just may not realize the potential it has. And we do that with our finance people, our IT people, our developers. We go out and actually meet customers, not as salespeople. There's no monetary award in it for us, but we can actually make such a difference to them talking in a peer relationship and a sales relationship. The impact is incredible. The second bit is about our community, because again, what we've done in the last year is we've thought about the footprint we have, and if we thought about not just giving money and raising money to charity, which is needed, and we're very, very strong in that regard, but actually giving people access to the skill sets we have in Ireland. So I happen to mentor someone who's a HR manager in a community group. We have people do that all around our business who actually will go out and mentor and give access to the skills and resources we have. And not in an arrogant way, it's not saying that we know everything, but actually we have some experience that we can share with you and give something back beyond the monetary value that we give you. And the final thing, going back to where I started, is it's not just about being number one. So number one is fantastic. We had a lesson when we didn't go into it that our people derive enormous pride from that. But the ultimate goal is actually to think about the legacy that we're leaving. And if it's just about winning an award or being number one, that's not going to be sustainable, because you won't win it every year. I can guarantee you. In fact, I put my money in it. I think we'll find it very difficult to win it again next year. But it's actually about the goal we have, which is actually to create a sustainable environment. And the litmus test I always put to myself is this somewhere where I want my kids to work? Is this somewhere where my oldest girl is 7, she'll be working in whatever, 11 to 15 years' time? Is this somewhere I'd want her to come in and work? Is it somewhere she can have an impact? Is it somewhere where she'd be trusted? Is it somewhere where she'd get developed? And to me, that's a key thing, because if you take the foot off the pedal for that, that's not going to be great. The other thing I think that's incredibly important, and it's a lot of the discussion we've had in the last 2 years as a leadership team, is from a country and a society perspective, is if we don't continue to do this, if we don't continue to focus on employee engagement, that could have a negative implication for our company, and by implication the society we're in, because the competition in a global company like ours comes from places like India and China, and we're not going to beat them on cost. You can forget it. We're as expensive as America at this stage, and we're more expensive than India and China. But where we can be competitive is around the innovation we produce, not just in the products and services, not just the website, that helps community groups access Microsoft products, but actually how we go about our work. And that will bring more work into Ireland. And that's a legacy we can leave such that it's a sustainable business that gives back to the society we live in. So final thought, this is the final thought. So Tanya said to me, try and do something provocative at the end. So this is my attempt at being provocative. This is a book I read, I think it was 3 years ago. And the statement is fairly black and white, but my learning from it was, the basic thesis was, in a private company, investors on Wall Street, any financial analysts will interrogate your strategy. They'll think about your metrics, your revenue, your customers, etc., etc. What they don't spend time on is the culture and the people. Now, I'm naturally disposed towards making sure your people are set up in the right way and you have the right culture. But I've used it to actually stimulate a discussion with our leadership team, which is, we spend a lot of time on the strategy, which we should, because you need a good strategy. But how much time do we actually spend on the culture? And are we really spending the time we need to think about our engagement strategy, how we bring our people in, how we trust them, give them an opportunity to impact, and how we continue the personal development? And it's just been a really good hook to actually keep testing that with ourselves, which is at our monthly meetings, how much time is on people and culture, how much time is on the business. So it's just one that appealed to me. It's a little bit black and white, but it has certainly forced a more provocative discussion.